Hey everybody, welcome to episode 58 of the AskDAP show, where we answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode, we talk about the fitment of 19-inch Savannahs on a Mark 7 on air, sporadic dead coolant gauges, and comparing Mark 7 accessory mirrors to our European imported ones.
Raymond via YouTube says, DAP, I had the same issue with a dead coolant gauge and changed the ECT sensor, gray 2-pin, but my gauge only worked for a day and started to play dead again. If I disconnect the battery, the gauge will work again, but only for a little bit. Should I change the thermostat now? I drive a 2007 Audi A3 8P.
Okay, so Raymond, the issue you're referring to me sounds like I'm pretty confident that changing your thermostat is not going to help you. First of all, if you have an issue with your thermostat, obviously it's going to take time for the vehicle to warm up. And if the thermostat was generally what happens with VW and Audis, especially 2-liter turbo, that's an FSI engine. I'll link to the thermostat here where you can check that out. But most likely what happens when the thermostats fail is they actually get stuck open, which causes the engine to run cool, which generally would happen not on hot weather like we're having right now. We're in summer, but if it were to be cold outside, what would happen is you'd start your car, drive it for a while, the engine would actually never get warm. It would just maybe hopefully get up to operating temperature, then maybe drop back down and then come back up. Or sometimes, a lot of times when thermostats get stuck open like that, in cold weather, they actually will never get up to temperature and just stay that way. Most likely the issue that you're having, unfortunately for your circumstance, is probably the instrument cluster itself. One of the motors that actually controls the needle for the gauge is malfunctioning, so periodically it's just basically dropping and then coming back up and then wakes back up, and then it drops again. So I would say it's pretty certain that that's what's going on. Unfortunately, VW and Audis don't have serviceable parts inside their instrument clusters. The whole cluster has to be replaced, and that's generally pretty expensive, to the tune of anywhere, $400, $500, $600 generally. Something you might want to look into is there are places that actually remanufacture clusters or repair them under these type of circumstances. I think it may depend on car and different things like that. I don't have intimate knowledge of that. I just know that they're out there. I wouldn't recommend for the average person to try to do this repair on your own, because if you do, you're more likely to completely damage the cluster trying to take it apart in the first place. So hopefully that answers your question, and I would again go down the road of instrument cluster on that.
Gerardo via shopdap.com says, Hi, I'm having trouble with my car. I have a 2010 CC 2.0 TSI. It cranks but doesn't start. I hooked up a scanner and it throws P062 fuel pump circuit high, but I don't know what to look for. Another definition for this code says internal control module fuel injector performance.
So Gerardo, so that fault code, here's the problem with this particular situation. I'm not familiar with that fault code. I tried to look it up just to see if I could find out more details. And unfortunately to me, it seems like a really generic code, which has very little data. And this is one thing with VW and Audis. When you go down the road of trying to diagnose them, you're going to want to have a scan tool that has a proper access to read the codes properly. That's why people have used VAGCOM, and now obviously we have the Audi 11, which is a VAGCOM alternative for less money. I'll link to it here where you can check that out, but that would probably give you a more accurate fault code. I'm not sure that this is correct, but I feel like I'm making the assumption that that is a really generic code that kind of points to the fuel system and doesn't give you specifics as to what the faults are. Let's go with a couple things related to thoughts I had about that. If you're having a no start issue and you're having a fuel code, you're probably related to one of a few things on that car. It's either the high pressure fuel pump is bad, which is probably not as likely as either the low pressure fuel pump in the tank and or the low pressure fuel pump module are having issues which are preventing it from delivering fuel to the front of the car. They are located underneath the rear seat and are fairly easily replaced, or at least the module is. The pump obviously has to, it comes out through the, there's an access port in the rear seat, but obviously that's a much more challenging install than replacing the module. I actually have a DIY that I did on the module itself on a Mark V Jetta. It's not the same as your CC, but it is the same part and a similar location, so the process would be very similar. So I'll put a link to that fuel pump module here where you can check out the DIY we have on that. And like I said, you have probably very likely to be something either related to the fuel pump in the tank or the fuel pump module.
Edwin Neville via shopdap.com says, I'm going to be getting a Mark 7 GTI just like the one on this page, but will be bagged. Do you think these 19-inch Savannah wheels will tuck into the fenders laid out? If not, can they be machined to get them to not stick out? Are there any replicas available? Thanks, love what you do.
What Edwin is actually referring to is a while back we had a blowout deal that we got on Savannah wheels, and obviously we passed them off. They were a crazy good deal. I think we were selling them for $6.99 for a set of 4 Savannah 19-inch OEM wheels. And so during that time we actually test fit them on my Mark 7 so that people could see kind of how they fit, because people always have a million questions about offset and how they fit and blah 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 and all this other stuff. Will they sit flush, whatever. So at that time we had a local buddy of ours who had a set of Savannahs that were off of his car. He has an Audi A3 that he had them on, and we threw them on my car as a test fit just to show people, hey, here's how Savannahs would fit on a Mark 7 GTI, just to show you. So if you take a look here, here are our pictures. Here's a side shot. I personally love the Savannahs on that car. They look really good. The one thing I'll say is if you take a look from our side rear shot or a rear shot of the side of the car, which shows you a better idea of offset, you can actually see that they poke a little bit because Savannahs have an offset of 33, and they are, I think, an 8.5-inch wide wheel. I can't remember. I think they're either 8.5 or 9-inch wheel. And so they're pretty wide, and so they sit a little wide. And on a lowered car, I think they're okay. You know, this car has coilovers. That setup was actually not done, no adjustment done to the coilover. So that was basically how we have it now, which is almost as low as they'll go on the Bilstein coilovers. And that particular setup shows them poking pretty good. I like the fitment of that setup pretty good, but if you're on air, you're almost certainly going to damage your fenders if you try to lay out with that particular setup. In regards to machining the wheels, I would never really recommend this, because basically what you would do to machine the wheel, and I'll put a link, I actually have an article I wrote about offset, which kind of just gives you a basic, super broad overview of how wheel offset works and how it affects fitment of wheels, that I'll put in the description below. And we have some examples that show you just photoshopped versions of a rough idea of what happens when you change the offset in any direction or the other, and to give people an idea of kind of what to expect. But basically what's going to happen is he's referring to machining part of the hub of the wheel down to make it a lower or a higher offset. So higher offset means it would tuck into the vehicle more. I don't recommend that, just based on the fact that I'm not sure anybody can know how much is an acceptable tolerance to allow the wheel to still be safe and reliable to drive on, and get you the machine. So, you know, that's the wheel, let's say, has an offset of 33, and you want to get down to 40, and you have to take 7 millimeters off of the face of that wheel. I don't know if there's 7 millimeters of wheel to take off before you get to an unacceptable amount of hub to where maybe the bolts will snap through if you hit a hard pothole. I don't really know. I don't recommend that. I don't think that's a great idea in general, because I think you're starting to edge on some really unsafe practices that I just think are generally a bad idea. About replica wheels, I don't know of any replica Savannah wheels out there. Maybe something to look for is somebody who bought them on blowout who is willing to let them go for a reasonable price. Savannahs are generally pretty expensive wheels. I think we sell them now after the blowout, I want to say, for about $1,400 for a set. So, but hopefully that answers your question about Savannahs and fitment and all that stuff.
A user via Reddit says, I have a 2007 VW GTI 2-liter turbo auto transmission that I bought used. Previous owner took shit care of it, and as a result the engine died. Took the head to a shop and the cam lobes are bad, not smooth, chunks missing. Some other things I can't remember, So I've been to get a new engine, as it would probably be cheaper than buying a new head. Now my question is, we don't know if the turbo is bad or not. If it is, and I can get the engine back into running condition, can I run it for a time without a functioning turbo without causing damage until I can get the cash to fix the turbo?
All right, so you have an FSI engine. Sounds like you purchased it and you had some issues around the camshaft. So I don't know how much video coverage we've actually done of this, but I wrote articles around FSI common problems. I'll put a link to the common problems article in the description, but I have a link about cam follower and camshaft wear that I'll link to here where you can check out more information on that. But it sounds like basically what happens is cam followers, people don't pay attention to them. They have a tendency to wear. If they wear all the way through, then you'll actually have the fuel pump riding directly on the camshaft, which will then also destroy the camshaft itself. There was an updated camshaft that came out. There was a warranty extension that VW did. There's a whole bunch of stuff to cover on that. But what it sounds like to me is that happened and they allowed it to destroy the camshaft in the cylinder head and then obviously the cam follower and the fuel pump. It sounds to me like either you're not aware of this problem or something to that effect. If both camshafts, I assume both camshafts are not damaged. It's just the one cam that's actually causing the issue. If that's the case, I personally would not recommend replacing the engine, but you know, that's really up to you. The one thing I'll say is obviously anytime you're buying an engine under that circumstance, I just don't think it's a necessary act. And always buying a used engine has question marks around it in itself, how well it was maintained and all that stuff. So, you know, at least with the engine you're working with, you kind of have an idea of what's going on. Now, there's always a big contention point, and this is really tough to say because, you know, Max, the guy who works here with me, has an FSI that he mentioned. Actually, funny, we were talking about this today, and he mentioned that when his cam follower actually busted apart, there was a piece of metal in his oil pump pickup that he found in there, and obviously, and he's breaking down his engine for a big turbo build, so he actually looked at the bearings on the crankshaft and on the rods, and he said that there was some scoring on there, which was likely a result of the metal that was output by the fact that his camshaft and cam lobe wore all the way through. All that metal has to go somewhere, and will likely make its way down into the oil pan. And then if it's small enough to make it through the oil pump itself, then it's likely going to get pumped into those bearings and all that stuff, causing potential damage to those parts. All that makes you think that you would want to buy a new engine or a used engine. The problem is you're rolling the dice either way. The used engine, that was such a prevalent issue with FSI engines that the used engine could have the exact same problem. It could also have the old camshaft when you want to update to the new camshaft anyway, which would be something that getting the updated cam will help you prevent excessive wear on the cam follower and the potentially damaging the fuel pump in the future and all that stuff. So, you know, I would say this: if you're going down the road of engine, I understand it may be the choice for you. If you're getting an engine at a reasonable price, it may be something you want to look at. Obviously, I would generally make sure if you're not replacing the camshaft, you're checking the follower very frequently to ensure you don't have wear to create basically this scenario again, and hopefully that will take you down the right path. So about the turbo. So your turbo, you're concerned because of that other stuff we talked about with the metal getting through the engine. Your concern is the turbo damage. The reality is you have no idea. There's no way to know one way or the other indefinitely if the turbo is damaged due to that. I would say probably not, but if it was run for a really long time with a lot of metal in it, it's possible it could have pumped all those metal shavings through the turbo itself. Running it without it, here's the only major risks you run of running a car with a bad turbo. Two major things that I see, and we recently heard of I think it was a diesel car that was at a dealer. A friend of ours, Charles, the home mechanic, mentioned that he had a customer's car that basically it spit out one of the compressor wheels into the intake and then went through and actually got stuck in one of the valves, and I think it got into one of the cylinders of the actual engine itself, which eventually damaged the engine. and the complete engine need to be replaced. That's a pretty unlikely scenario. Generally, that would not happen. The more likely scenario would be if the turbo would just blow, one of the seals in the turbo blows out. Sometimes what will happen is the hot side wheel will blow out, which means it'll just blow the wheel down the downpipe. In those circumstances, you're going to just have plumes of smoke coming out because of all the oil that's now escaping into the exhaust. Most likely, you're not going to have any major concerns about engine damage. Like I said, even though that first scenario we talked about is plausible, it's much less likely. And driving a car, if you don't even know if the turbo is bad, I wouldn't just make the assumption and maybe go down the road of trying it and see, if you know it's bad already, I wouldn't recommend trying to reinstall a bad turbo and just to limp it along down the road. You're better off buying a used turbo from somebody online who upgraded. That's a much more economical choice that you could find one for probably a pretty reasonable price.
Liang Du via YouTube says, thanks to the tutorial, I have a question for your online store. What is the difference between this part number and this other part number for a US version Golf R? Which one is fitted? Thanks.
Okay, so MK7 mirror caps. So what he's referring to is actually, there are two different mirror caps that we now offer for MK7s. They're both a silver color mirror. One of them is the European OEM Golf R mirror caps, which we import, and then the other one being a new accessory mirror cap set that VW now offers. I'll put a link to both of them in the description below, and then the European R mirrors here, where you can check them out. But basically, here's the deal. We actually had a customer who contacted us about this and brought to our attention that these even existed in the first place. And when we heard about them, I ordered them because I was thinking the price was actually considerably cheaper than what we can offer the European ones for. And so I thought, man, this could be something that people will really be interested in if they are indeed the same, if VW somehow packaged up the European ones and then turn them into an accessory. When we ordered them, I confirmed they are not the same mirror caps. They are definitely a different mirror cap than the European ones we import. How is really super hard to tell. A lot of people have asked, like, hey, can you give us pictures? And I actually was planning to, when I shot this, I was planning to compare them side by side on camera just so you can see that they're actually the same. We have since ship them out, so we don't have them here anymore, unfortunately, to compare. But basically the deal is, I would say likely even when I'm holding them side by side, you're not going to be able to see too much of a difference. They are in definitely a different mirror cap. The European ones have kind of, I always assumed they were plastic with some sort of coating on them, some sort of finish on them, but they actually feel cool to the touch in general, which makes me feel like they are either metallic in some fashion or have a metallic coating, an actual metallic coating on them. Whereas the ones that we ordered, which are the accessory ones, were clearly not the same. They had more of a plastic feel. They're not cool to the touch. They call them like a satin silver. They probably have a similar look, so if you're trying to accomplish that aluminum look mirror for, I would say, I think they're roughly around $50 less per set, then that might be a decent option for you. It really depends on what's choice for you. Most of the Golf R guys are pretty diehard, and they want their stuff to be exactly right, and since they're super meticulous, which is why they tend to buy always the European tinted Golf R taillights, and then they tend to also pair them often with those aluminum mirror caps because they are the correct things in Europe for the Golf Rs. And if you're just looking for it as an aesthetic thing, you may have a different preference about it. They're both factory parts. I would lean towards the fact that the European ones actually are nicer, but they do cost more money. So it really depends on if you feel like that's a value or not. Thank you so much for watching episode 58 of the AskDAP show, where we answer your Volkswagen Audi questions. If you have any comments or questions about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.